LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 11th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mix-Up. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. My topic, as you can see from the title of the video, is Trump still a threat to U.S. democracy? There was a lot of coverage of that on the Sunday morning news programs, although when I get to all five of the news summaries, you'll see that I actually have 6 news summaries because I have 2 news summaries from ABC, and ABC did an extended news summary on the threat to U.S. democracy from the Trump administration based on ABC Chief White House Correspondent Jonathan Karl's new book, Betrayal, the Final Act of the Trump Show. That's the subtitle of the book. I'm sorry, I was looking at my notes there. And by the way, you can see a description of, a summary of what is in every one of the 11 clips down in the video description, as well as the source of all my clips. I'll also be talking about the infrastructure deal and the Build Back Better reconciliation plan and what's going on with that and what happened with the debt ceiling. That all will get covered in the 5 news summaries that I was talking about. But there were, and Fox News didn't really focus on the threat from Trump to our democracy at all. But you'll see when I juxtapose the 5 news summaries. I want to start with, and I apologize in advance for this, but to cover Trump as a threat to U.S. democracy, I have to give you a clip of Donald Trump at his rally in Iowa on Saturday. This is, actually, you'll see this clip in the ABC News Summary, a shorter version, where he says this kind of ridiculous thing about make America great again. And what is also very Trumpian about the beginning of this clip is the way that he makes a mistake. He actually, our new slogan was going to be, and he should have said, keep America great. But he messes that up. So he does this thing where he backtracks and pretends he didn't make a mistake, and then comes sort of back around to it. You'll see that at the beginning of the clip. But there's also something going on at the end of this clip that I want to talk about that you don't see in the ABC version. That's why I kept playing this for, 3 minutes, 45 seconds of Donald Trump on Saturday night. But I had to watch the entire hour, 40-minute speech. There's a link down in the video description to the full speech on C-SPAN if you want to subject yourself to that. But I've just picked out this 3 minutes, 45 seconds to talk with you about after we watch together over here.
As everybody here knows, my new slogan was going to be, make America, remember this, remember? It was supposed to be something a little different than make America great. It was supposed to be keep America great. But America's not great right now, so we're using the same slogan, make America great again. And we may even add to it, but we'll keep it. Make America great again, because we already did it, right? We're going to make America great again. No, I had a whole big deal, and it was all good, and, it was just going to be keep America great, because we made it great. Our military was rebuilt, our economy was great, our job numbers were the best. We had the best country we've ever had, and in 9 months, little more, they've destroyed our country. So I can't say keep America great, so I'm back to make America great again. / comma, again. Make America great again. I don't know. What do you like better? It's really, you think about it, if you think about it, it's more accurate. Make America great again. Because we made it great. Now we have to make it great again, so it's one of those things. But make America great again. Our nation's comeback begins in November 2022 when we're going to reclaim the House and we're going to reclaim the United States Senate. And we have with us tonight a great American patriot, a man who truly loves Iowa. He's young, very young guy. He's strong, and he's very handsome. He fights like no other. When I've needed him for help, he was always there, especially with anything having to do with farmers, and that includes ethanol. Nobody's ever done more. I know more about ethanol than anybody in the audience, I think. He was with us all the way. Every time I needed something, you know, he's very persnippety sometimes, right? He's tough. But when I needed him, he was always there. And I just want to ask Senator Chuck Grassley just to come up for a second. Chuck Grassley, strong on military, strong on vets, strong on our under siege Second Amendment. He helped pass the USMCA, helped confirm almost 300 federal judges and 3 great Supreme Court justices. Come here. You are the greatest. Look at this. He's young. I'm thrilled to announce tonight that Senator Chuck Grassley has my complete and total endorsement for re-election. Chuck. Want to say anything?
Yes. I was born at night, but not last night. So if I didn't accept the endorsement of a person that's got 91% of the Republican voters in Iowa, I wouldn't be too smart. I'm smart enough to accept that endorsement.
Thank you very much. We love you, Chuck. Be careful going down there. He's a great guy.
So yeah, you saw at the beginning, as I mentioned before I showed the clip, that he messed up the slogan was supposed to be "Keep America Great," but now it's "Make America Great Again," which is kind of stupid. That whole thing was kind of stupid. And then you see how he kept emphasizing how young Chuck Grassley is. But I mean that's the kind of lying I guess all politicians do. That's not specific to the pathological lying of Trump. But Chuck Grassley, keep in mind, is 86 years old and is about to run for re-election for another 6-year term, which, I don't know, saying he's young and strong is kind of a little bit contradicted by, be careful going down the ramp at the end or whatever. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting and kind of relates to the topic of the video is the way the Republican Party has to kowtow to Donald Trump. I mean, it's so bad when Chuck Grassley came up and made his short statement there, it was like he was answering this question that no one asked. It was basically the question Trump is a huge, pathological liar who fomented an insurrection and refuses to accept the results of a legitimate election, so why are you accepting his endorsement? Or something like that. But basically he was answering a question about, why are you accepting this guy's endorsement? If you go back and watch it, he's saying, well, I was born last night, or I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night, and so I'd be crazy not to accept the endorsement of someone who has the support of 91% of Republicans. Well, I don't know, I guess it depends on if you're a leader or just a politician, and I guess Chuck Grassley wouldn't still be in the Senate at 86 if he wasn't a politician, but that's my commentary on that clip. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section, and now I'm going to get to the news summaries. And like I said, before I show the 5 news summaries that the Sunday News Analysis shows put at the very beginning of their programs, I'm going to show this news summary that came later on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where you'll see George Stephanopoulos does a brief introduction with the shorter version of that clip I just showed you of Donald Trump, and then transitions over to a report from Jonathan Karl, both about news in the last week where we found out more about things that happened around the January 6th insurrection, and then additional reporting that Jonathan Karl has done himself for his new book, Betrayal, the Final Chapter of the Trump Show, that I was talking about earlier. So this isn't the longest of the news summaries, and it's not a news summary from the beginning of a program, but I'm sticking it here because I think it's the best news summary for my topic, although NBC News Meet the Press covers it pretty well in the news summary I'll show next. But and that was actually at the beginning of NBC News' Meet the Press. But here's the Jonathan Karl summary of his new book that, I don't know, you can let me know if you think I should buy this book and put it up behind me. Betrayal, the Final Chapter of the Trump Show. Let me know what you think while we watch the clip together over here.
As everybody here knows, my new slogan was going to be, Make America, remember this, remember? It was supposed to be something a little different than Make America Great. It was supposed to be Keep America Great. But America's not great right now, so we're using the same slogan, Make America Great Again. And we may even add to it, but we'll keep it. Make America Great Again.
Donald Trump in Iowa last night as we learn more this week about the former president's actions ahead of the January 6th insurrection. Chief Washington correspondent John Karl has new reporting on that day in his new book, Betrayal. He joins us live after this report.
While the Capitol was invaded by his supporters, Donald Trump remained out of sight at the White House. Establishing what exactly he was doing is a central goal of the January 6th investigation in the House. The committee has demanded a mountain of confidential documents related to what Trump, his top aides, and members of his family were up to during the riot. On Friday, President Biden ordered the National Archives to turn over a batch of those documents. While presidents of both parties have long fought to protect executive privilege, which allows a president to keep deliberations with aides confidential, Biden's White House counsel said in this case, President Biden has determined that an assertion of executive privilege is not in the best interests of the United States.
He believes it to be of the utmost importance for both Congress and the American people to have a complete understanding of the events of that day to prevent them from happening again.
Trump is vowing to fight in court, asserting the documents must remain confidential and issuing an angry statement against what he called a fake investigation. For my upcoming book, Betrayal, the Final Act of the Trump Show, I spoke to several people who were in contact with Trump during the riot. Trump, the sources say, was watching TV in his private dining room. He liked what he saw. He boasted about the size of the crowd, and he argued with aides who wanted him to call on his supporters to stop the rioting. I learned more details about Kevin McCarthy's call to Trump as the rioters tried to storm the House chamber. According to a source familiar with the call, McCarthy, frustrated at Trump's indifference to what was happening, said, quote, "I just got evacuated from the Capitol. There were shots fired right off the House floor. You need to make this stop." The source said Trump pushed back, saying, quote, "They are just more upset than you because they believe it more than you, Kevin," referring to the lie that the election had been stolen. After the riot had been underway for some 2 hours, Trump finally agreed to make a video statement. In that message, he reluctantly agreed to ask his supporters to go home, but he also praised them.
We love you. You're very special.
In Betrayal, I revealed that an aide who was present for the video recording told me Trump had to tape the message several times before they got it right. And in earlier rejected versions, Trump neglected to tell supporters to leave the Capitol. Those video outtakes are precisely the kind of thing that could help the committee establish Trump's state of mind during the riot. Also this week, a Senate report documented alarming new details about the way Trump attempted to use the Justice Department to steal the presidential election. Attorney General Bill Barr refused to go along, infuriating Trump when he said in early December there was no widespread fraud.
Well, he hasn't done anything, so he hasn't looked. They haven't looked very hard, which is a disappointment, to be honest with you.
After Barr left in mid-December, the report says Trump pressured acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen to do his bidding, but he too refused. Rosen told the Senate committee he said to Trump that the Justice Department, quote, can't and won't just flip a switch and change the election. In response, Trump asked DOJ, quote, just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. In late December, the former president turned to Jeffrey Clark, a lawyer with no experience in election law, but who promised to declare without evidence that there was widespread voter fraud and to pressure contested states to reverse Biden's victory. Clark also brought a new conspiracy theory to the cocktail of falsehoods. As detailed in Betrayal, two sources familiar with Clark's actions told me he believed that wireless thermostats made in China for Google by a company called Nest Labs might have been used to manipulate voting machines in Georgia. The idea was nuts, but it intrigued Trump, who asked the director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, to look into it. At a dramatic 3-hour Oval Office meeting on January 3rd, Trump said he wanted to make Clark acting attorney general. Rosen told the committee that Trump said, quote, "One thing we know is you, Rosen, aren't going to do anything to overturn the election." Trump was then told that every senior DOJ official would resign if he went through with his plan, as well as White House counsel Pat Cipollone, who said Trump's plan amounted to a murder-suicide pact. Reluctantly, Trump backed down. I spoke to 3 people present for that extraordinary meeting in the Oval Office. I am told that once Trump realized that he would face mass resignations at the Justice Department and simply could not fire Rosen, that he turned over to the dejected and rejected Stuart Clark, and he asked Rosen, "What are you going to do to him now?" And Rosen said, there are no hard feelings. You are the only one who can fire him. So, George, after Jeffrey Clark tried and failed to engineer a coup at the Justice Department, he kept his job.
John, extraordinary reporting right there, showing pretty clearly the president was
That is actually pretty good reporting there from Jonathan Karl, and I don't know, maybe that book is worth getting. I mean, they say journalism is the first draft of history, and this sounds like Jonathan Karl may have prepared a good first draft of how we're going to remember the January 6th insurrection historically, and the participation of Trump and some of his, other Republicans. That's something that I'll be talking about when I get to the senators who are involved with the Judiciary Committee's report that came out, some of which you just saw detailed by Jonathan Karl there, showing that there was a lot of stuff going on in the background that we didn't know about until now. And Sheldon Whitehouse will even talk about how this is just an interim report that the Senate Judiciary Committee put out, and they're expecting that they may find even more evidence of who was behind it all, who provided the money, who did the organizing, and things could still come out of that. And they also talk about Sheldon Whitehouse, Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse will also talk about the investigation into election interference in Georgia, where he almost says there's a criminal investigation, or that they're investigating crime, or he almost calls it, well, I'll wait till we get to that clip, which is clip 10, if you're looking down at the numbered clips summaries down in the video description. But I want to now get to the 5 news summaries that show what the big 5 corporate outlets showed at the beginning of their Sunday news analysis shows. Like I said, NBC News' Meet the Press also did a pretty good job of talking about what came out from the Senate Judiciary Committee and some of the other things regarding the threat to our democracy from the continuing threat or from the continuing presence of Donald Trump and power of Donald Trump in the Republican Party, which, there are a lot of reasons that it's dangerous, and I think Chuck Todd goes into a lot of them in this news summary that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good Sunday morning from our NBC News Bureau in Los Angeles. Every day, it seems, we're learning how fragile our democracy is. Just this past week, the Senate Judiciary Committee released a report about just how close we came to losing that democracy in the weeks after the election. The report provides new details on a January 3rd White House meeting where top Justice Department officials had to threaten to resign en masse to stop President Trump from taking further steps to overturn the election. We also learned that last week, Mr. Trump told his former aides to not comply with subpoenas from Congress regarding the January 6th riot at the Capitol. And a Facebook whistleblower told Congress this week how the company returned to relax security measures right after the election, but before January 6th, even as Mr. Trump was lying about vote fraud. All because they wanted to keep up engagement and profits. So ask yourself this: is it alarmist to suggest that our democracy is at risk? Or are we really staring at the abyss? Whatever side of the political divide you're on that issue, getting to the bottom of Mr. Trump's actions on and around January 6th will give us all more clarity on how close we actually came to the shredding of our Constitution and how close we could come again.
I never conceded.
Donald Trump in Iowa last night, doubling down on the lie that he won the election after a week of playing down the January 6th riot he incited.
First of all, he didn't get elected. Okay, forget that. No reason to concede.
We're not going to take it anymore. I see a civil war coming. I do.
On Friday, the White House formally blocked an attempt by Trump's attorneys to withhold documents related to the Capitol assault.
The president has determined that an assertion of executive privilege is not warranted for the first set of documents from the Trump White House.
Among the documents requested by the Select Committee, Trump's Twitter messages, his calendar, schedules, video, photos, and call logs.
Well, we want to know, what was the president's involvement? What about people around him?
Urged on by Trump, former advisor Steve Bannon told the committee he will not comply with a request for records and testimony. But former Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and Pentagon advisor Kash Patel are engaging with the committee, and former Trump Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino has finally received his subpoena.
The committee will probably, to those who don't agree to come in voluntarily, will do criminal referral.
This, as a new Senate report describes Trump's extraordinary efforts in the days before the insurrection to overturn the results of the election.
We will win this, and as far as I'm concerned, we already have won it.
Detailing at least 9 times Trump pressured Justice Department officials to overturn Biden's legitimate victory, including a meeting on January 3rd when Trump threatened to replace acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen with a loyalist, Jeffrey Clark, to carry out his scheme.
The president was relentless. We were a half step away from a full-blown constitutional crisis. If Rosen would have folded...
But top leaders at the Justice Department warned they would resign en masse if he acted, as did White House counsel Pat Cipollone, who called Trump's plan a murder-suicide pact. Now, a parade of former Trump officials are recounting Trump's obsession with overturning the election in an attempted coup.
He was heightened, and he was so, about this was stolen from us, this was stolen from us.
We all watched it happening, and because it, didn't seem to be behind the scenes, clandestine in any way, it became normalized.
But many Republicans are still defending him.
The president did the right thing. If he had made another decision, you would have had a problem.
And around the country, Trump allies are pushing laws that would allow Republican legislatures to more easily overturn the vote if it does not go their way.
I'm alarmed, and I think most people are alarmed that we're still talking and still facing these issues of election disinformation.
This is about going after the integrity of not only the election system in Idaho, but people going after the integrity of the election system as a whole.
This is without a doubt the biggest threat to our democracy in my lifetime.
And joining me now is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island.
And like I said, I will have some of that Sheldon Whitehouse interview talking, where the senator talks about this Senate Judiciary Committee report that you saw detailed there in Chuck Todd's first live news summary, followed by his pre-recorded package, which, like I said, covered a lot of the same ground as ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos' news summary and Jonathan Karl talking about his new book, but NBC put it right at the beginning of the program as the most important story. You also noticed in that news summary they talked about the Facebook whistleblower. I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the program as to other topics that got covered in the news summaries. I think that may come up in one of the other news summaries, but the Facebook spokesperson, Nick Clegg, I think his name is, he's like Vice President of Global Affairs or something. He was on 3 or 4 of the Sunday morning news analysis shows yesterday. I don't have any clips of him, but he was responding to that Facebook whistleblower, and you saw Chuck Todd on the NBC News Meet the Press news summary there sort of wove that into the threat to democracy theme, which kind of makes sense. And then you saw Democratic Senator Dick Durbin in the pre-recorded NBC package say that there really is a constitutional crisis, but compare that to what our good friend Senator Chuck Grassley, who we just saw getting endorsed by Trump at that Saturday rally. He says, well, just because Trump came up with this plan to overturn the election and tried to get all these people to help him and only didn't do it when like several members of his administration threatened to publicly resign if he did it, but he didn't actually do it, so he made the right decision, according to Chuck Grassley. So that is ridiculous, of course, and an important thing to include in the news summary because it just shows the rot in the Republican Party that has been created by, created by Donald Trump or exploited by Donald Trump is probably more accurate. I forgot to mention, one of the clips I'm going to show you is Representative Adam Schiff actually say that the Republican Party has turned into a Trump-centered cult. And I'm also going to show you Representative Steve Scalise on Fox News Sunday, unable to say that Biden won the 2020 election fairly, which also kind of supports this rot in the Republican Party theme or argument that I'm making. But anyway, and the one other thing I wanted to say about the NBC News Meet the Press news summary before I move on to CBS News Face the Nation's news summary is that it mentioned right at the end one of the biggest threats from these so-called voter suppression laws. They do have a lot of things that make it harder to vote, but as I've mentioned over the months that this has been going on, going all the way back to the video I made called New Jim Crow, asking whether these voter suppression laws were like the new version of the Jim Crow laws that went from like the 1880s all the way up to the 1960s or whatever. So those laws that make it harder to vote are a real threat, but the bigger threat are the laws that you saw talked about at the end of that NBC News Meet the Press news summary that give the state legislatures the power to overturn the results of an election if they don't like it. Even if the popular vote in a state was like 10 points in favor of Biden, they can just say, well, we're going to send our electors to Trump. And they couldn't do that in 2020 because state law didn't allow it, but they've been changing a lot of those state laws. And I'll talk about that a little more when I show the Representative Steve Scalise clip, because he talks about that. But next I want to show you the CBS News Face the Nation news summary, Margaret Brennan and Mark Strassman. I've mentioned many times that CBS maybe should be called the COVID broadcasting system. CBS should stand for that, because they were the earliest, best coverage of COVID back at a time when it was like, are they overhyping the threat of this emerging disease in China back in like January, February of 2020? And that's what I said at the time. They're either overhyping this threat, or they're the only network that's covering the biggest story of the year. And guess what? Turned out to be number 2. But I don't know, I say that too many times. But that is also what they focused on this week, the continuing COVID crisis and how it's affecting jobs and the economy, especially. Margaret Brennan and Mark Strassman back in Atlanta this week. I think he was in Florida last time we saw him. But anyway, here's that CBS News Face the Nation news summary. Totally different topic, but at least a reasonable journalistic topic. You could say this is the most important story and not all this political stuff I've been talking about with the threat of Trump that may or may not come to fruition. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. After last week's disappointing jobs report and the latest round of budget battles on Capitol Hill, we are reminded yet again that COVID continues to be the biggest drag on our economic recovery. We begin with CBS News senior national correspondent Mark Strassman in Atlanta this morning.
Woke people. Hey, can you watch your language? No. there are around kids.
More than a moment short of a disorder. COVID America has functioning anxiety, day after day, living with this lingering virus.
We will not comply. We will not comply.
Upset, uncertain, on edge. Frustrated other people who ironically feel the same way won't come to their senses.
We want to end this pandemic. We are all exhausted by it.
Including most vaccinated Americans. Our new CBS poll found 56% of them said they were at risk because of the unvaccinated. The virus, with no end in sight, has killed more than 700,000 Americans. There is some hope, cases now declining in 32 states.
1, 2, 3.
And Pfizer's hoping its vaccine for kids ages 5 to 11 gets emergency approval by the end of the month. Not a moment too soon, as the Delta variant remains pitiless. Our relationship status with America's economy also complicated. Cash-happy consumers want to spend, but too often the message in stores, we're out of that. Empty grocery shelves in North Carolina, food shortages for schools, and yet off the coast of Southern California, 500,000 shipping containers wait for unloading. Even good news seems to come with a catch. Take America's new jobless rate, less than 5%. Fewer than 200,000 new jobs were created last month, a major disappointment. Even with millions of openings, employers can't find good help these days, or any help. Millions of jobless people now stay home. Why risk working and catching COVID, especially for mediocre money?
What do we want? What do we want?
At Buffalo's Mercy Hospital, this strike has drifted into its second week. Hundreds of healthcare workers demanding more staffing and better pay. They're stressed and they've had it. Sound familiar? More pandemic stress is on its way for private employers. OSHA is still working on issuing emergency guidance for mandatory vaccinations and testing for any company that employs at least 100 people. At least 24 states have promised to fight it. Margaret?
Mark, thank you. We want to take a look at America's views on some of those challenges facing the country and particularly how President Biden is handling them. Our CBS News poll out today indicates that the president's approval rating is at 50.
And I did that twice, that mistake there, but where I went to a blank LiberalViewer logo. Sorry about that. But I kept that last clip playing through the poll, and they had a big look at the CBS News poll with their polling director, whatever his title is, Anthony Salvante. And by the way, if you want to see all of CBS News Face the Nation, there's a link down in the video description to their free YouTube channel where they cut up the whole program into segments, and you can watch it there, including the Margaret Brennan's talk with Anthony Salvante. But I kept it playing there because you saw they had Biden's job approval rating at 50-50. But there was this Quinnipiac poll that had Biden's job approval rating at 38%, which based on other polling kind of looks like an outlier. It's not really that low, or it's either not that low or it was just like a momentary blip right after the Afghanistan withdrawal and he's already recovered some, or who knows. But the point is, Fox News has like totally jumped on that Quinnipiac poll that had Biden's job approval rating down to 38%. Like, I even saw during the week they were talking about even worse than Trump's rating. They were, which they never said that he was better than Trump's rating all the time before that. But anyway, I wanted to mention that. And I also, one thing before I move on to the Fox News Sunday News Summary, which it's not about Trump's threat to democracy. It's not even about COVID so much. It's more about bad news for Biden. Biden's doing badly and everybody hates him now. It's basically, I mean, that's the basic message of the next news summary I'm going to show you. But before I get to that, I wanted to also mention that Mark Strassman said something I haven't seen enough people say. People have said that one of the reasons workers aren't going back to their jobs is because they want more money. And over on Fox News, they always say it's because the government's paying them to stay home, which turned out really not to be true because the jobs numbers were also disappointing in this last period after they cut off those extra unemployment benefits. But Mark Strassman in his report said the reason that a lot of workers are giving is kind of a combination of COVID and low money. Like, why risk COVID for mediocre money was what he said. And I think that's a point that is not made strongly enough in a lot of these news reports on COVID, jobs, and the economy. But now I kind of pre-criticized the Fox News Sunday news summary from Chris Wallace and Mark Meredith. It's basically Biden sucks as president and everybody hates him now. That's how I would. You let me know if that's an accurate title for the Fox News Sunday news summary yesterday that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. President Biden's fortunes seem to be going from bad to worse. Disappointing jobs numbers on Friday were just the latest problem for an administration already dealing with a crisis at the border, persistent inflation, growing supply chain backups, and a pandemic that won't go away. And while the threat of defaulting on our debt was pushed off for 2 months, Democrats are still deadlocked over the president's domestic agenda. In a moment, we'll speak with the number 2 Republican in the House, Congressman Steve Scalise, and we'll get reaction from Democratic Senator Chris Coons. But first, let's bring in Mark Meredith, traveling with the president in Wilmington, Delaware, for the latest on an administration under fire. Mark.
Hey, Chris, the Senate's deal to raise the debt limit is really just a temporary stopgap that'll get Congress through early December. Meantime, we're watching as congressional Democrats are scrambling to keep the president's economic agenda alive.
We're actually making real progress.
President Biden wants Americans to be patient, even as the latest jobs report shows the U.S. economy is still struggling. The Labor Department reports employers added 194,000 jobs last month, far fewer than the 500,000 economists expected.
We know we have work to do. There's no question about it.
New polling shows most Americans feel the same way. A Quinnipiac University survey taken last week shows only 38% of Americans approve of the president's job performance.
Our focus is, yes, not exactly on the day-to-day up and downs of the polls.
But some Democrats are warning the White House fights within the party over spending priorities put the president's agenda at risk.
I keep saying that. If we do not get these bills passed, Democrats are in real trouble.
Republicans argue the polls prove Americans don't back the Democrats' spending plans.
The last thing we need to do is to give a larger runway for Democrats to continue to spend trillions of dollars of working class tax dollars.
Both parties are also closely watching that upcoming governor's race in Virginia. It's a key battleground state. Chris, last week, the Democrat running in the race, Terry McAuliffe, told his surrogates that the president's low approval ratings are hurting his chances in this election. Chris.
Mark Meredith reporting from Delaware. Mark, thank you. And joining us now, the number 2 Republican in the House, Steve Scalise, Congressman.
And as promised, I will have Steve Scalise refusing to admit that Biden fairly won the election, getting sort of cross-examined by Chris Wallace, but Chris Wallace also lets him get away with a whole bunch of misinformation as well. But like I said, that'll be clip number 9 after a couple more news summaries, and then Representative Adam Schiff explain why he thinks the Republican Party has become a Trump-centered cult. And I pretty much pre-criticized that Fox News Sunday news summary, but I think it lived up to what I promised. They really fixated on that Quinnipiac poll that showed Biden's job approval rating at 38%. They talked about all the problems Biden is having and how much everybody hates him now and how Democrats are divided. They didn't talk about how, they talked about the bad job numbers, didn't talk about what I was saying from the previous news summary, that they were still bad job numbers after they cut off those extra unemployment benefits that all the Republicans were saying was causing everyone to stay home and not work. So, they gave the fact, but didn't explain how it contradicted what they've been reporting for months, and didn't really talk about, in if you go and watch the beginning of Fox News Sunday, they do this little teaser before the news summary where they sort of preview what's going to be on the show. And they did show in that little teaser part that some Republicans were saying that Mitch McConnell caved on the debt ceiling and were criticizing him. But I'm not sure that ever really came up again. It wasn't in the actual news summary or like the first several minutes of the show of Fox News Sunday I just showed you. So they really, in their news summary, played up the division of Democrats and not what's going on with Republicans. But anyway, the next news summary is the CNN State of the Union news summary. They do actually cover some of the problems with the Biden agenda. They also cover the Facebook whistleblower, all in the 90 seconds I will talk about with you, 93 seconds actually, after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Dana Bash in Washington, where the State of our Union is wondering if it's safe to scroll. The world got a new reminder this week of how reliant we are on social media and how social media can heighten or amplify users' darkest impulses. Lawmakers are now vowing to act and add that to Washington's very long list of promises, including President Biden's top priorities, which remain mired in intra-party feuds. There is some evidence now that this string of delayed promises is weighing down Democrats trying to win in state races across the country. Coming up, we're going to talk to a Democrat on the ballot, the former head of the Democratic Party, Terry McAuliffe, trying to get his old job back as Virginia governor. But I want to begin with this week's revelations about Facebook. Whistleblower Frances Haugen, a former product manager at Facebook, released thousands of pages of internal documents. And she testified before Congress that Facebook's products, quote, harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy. She went on to blame the company for refusing to take steps to protect users.
The company's leadership knows how to make Facebook and Instagram safer, but won't make the necessary changes because they have put their astronomical profits before people. Congressional action is needed. They won't solve this crisis without your help.
Joining me now is Facebook's top spokesman, Vice President of Global Affairs, Nick Clegg. Mr. Clegg, thank you so much for joining me.
I got all that right. His name is Nick Clegg, and he is the Vice President of Global Affairs, and I guess their top communicator or whatever. And I think that is also a legitimate journalistic choice to put the Facebook whistleblower as the top story, along with, you saw CNN also covered problems that the Biden administration is having in some of the same facts you saw in the Fox News Sunday news summary before that, but not in the biased way where they focus on some 38% approval rating from one poll like over a week ago, and basically make it look like the Biden presidency is going down in flames when something could possibly happen where he drops down to Trump level approval ratings and never comes back, but that doesn't seem the most likely outcome. And that anyway, I think CNN covered it in a less biased way than Fox News did, and in a shorter time. And then they also highlighted the Facebook whistleblower. The final news summary I'm going to show you is from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Very brief, which I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. A week of cliffhangers in Washington, the economy at stake. Default has been avoided for now. Just enough Republicans joined Democrats to extend the debt ceiling until December, when deadlines on the debt, government funding, and the president's investment agenda will converge. What could be a make-or-break moment for Biden's presidency and America's economy. All this poses tough challenges for our headliner, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Good morning, Madam Secretary.
Oh, and that was actually a pretty good interview if it didn't fit my topic of the Trump's threat to U.S. democracy, but it did focus on some important issues about the economy and about what Congress is doing. Even asked about that weird idea to mint a platinum $1 trillion coin. And anyway, if you click on the link under sources in the video description. You can watch all of ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos yourself and see the interview with Janet Yellen. I'm going to show you, oh no, I don't actually have any more ABC clips. I already showed you the extra clip with Jonathan Karl talking about his book Betrayal, the last act of the Trump show that we're still kind of discussing. And anyway, I thought it probably would have been worth it to put more of what Jonathan Karl said in that news summary that I showed you first at the beginning of the program instead of doing what they... But I guess Janet Yellen is a big guest, the Secretary of the Treasury, so that is, I guess, an acceptable journalistic choice as well. But you can let me know what you think down in the comments section. And now I'm going to get to my 4 newsmaker clips before the bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip. I'm going to show you Adam Schiff, Steve Scalise, Sheldon Whitehouse, and Amy Klobuchar. So that's actually 3 Democrats, but it's actually the Republican Steve Scalise who I think makes the point most persuasively that Trump is still a threat to U.S. democracy. But you'll see here, the first clip I'm going to show you is from CBS News' Face the Nation, where Margaret Brennan is actually asking, I'm not going to show you the whole interview. You can watch the entire Adam Schiff interview by clicking on the CBS News Face the Nation link under sources in my video description, where you'll see the entire program split into segments, including the entire Adam Schiff interview. At the beginning of the interview, Adam Schiff is talking about bipartisanship and the bipartisan infrastructure deal, and etc. And here is, and when he's talking about bipartisanship, answering a question from Margaret Brennan, is when he first makes this assertion that the Republican Party is now a cult centered on Donald Trump. And then, as you might expect, Margaret Brennan asks several follow-up questions, which I think, well, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch that a little bit more than 5.5-minute clip from CBS News' Face the Nation together over here.
The challenge is when you're doing it only on party lines, it once again looks to people at home like they can't get along, Washington's not working again.
Well, look, we have a Republican Party that is now an autocratic cult around Donald Trump. It is not interested in governing. It's not interested in even maintaining the solvency and the creditworthiness of the country. And we have to recognize that they're not interested in governing. And so we're going to govern. We're going to have to do it. And if we have to do it with our own votes, we will do that. But we need to show that democracy delivers, that it can help people put food on the table, that it can address these huge disparities in income. There's so much reason why our democracy is at this fragile point right now, and we need to foremost deliver on the economy, but also on voting rights, and stop these efforts to disenfranchise people.
You just made an incredible statement about an autocratic cult. This is one of the themes in your book. You aren't often compared to conservative writers like Robert Kagan, but you come to basically the same conclusion he just did in a very widely read essay, where he says essentially that it's the Republican Party that is trying to lay the groundwork to challenge the next few elections. You say preparing the battlefield for the struggle to overturn the election. Should they regain majorities in Congress, they might be successful. You're saying we're on the cusp of a constitutional crisis.
Yes, and this is really why I wrote the book, because I wanted to sound the alarm that our democracy is hanging by a thread right now. As a member of the January 6th committee, you know, I have to acknowledge there may be another violent attack on the Capitol, but what is even more pressing a threat is what we see Republicans doing around the country, taking this big lie about the last election and running with it. And I wanted to tell the story in this book about how does that happen? How in 4 short years does our democracy become so threatened? And one of the terrible realizations for me is that so many of the people I worked with across the aisle, who I admired and respected because I believed that they believed what they were saying, turned out not to believe it at all, that the only thing that they cared about was the maintenance of their power or position. And I want to show people how that happens, how people start by making small compromises of their morality and their values and their ideology and end up completely capitulating. Because one of the things we discovered in the impeachment trial, but really both trials, is that there's nothing wrong about our Constitution. The provisions are brilliant. But unless they're animated by people who give content to their oath, that understand the importance of right and wrong, none of it works. And right now, we saw Grassley in Iowa yesterday, unable to condemn the president's effort to get the Justice Department to overturn the election. Scalise this morning, another Republican leader, unable to acknowledge that the election wasn't stolen. It's these personal capitulations that are putting our country at risk.
And that's a shift from where Senator Grassley, who accepted the former president's endorsement, was right after the events of January 6th. But I want to come back to where you lay blame, because you say it's we, the country, who made Donald Trump possible. He would not have been able to batter and break so many of our democratic norms had we not let him, had we not been capable of endless rationalization, had we not forgotten why we came to office in the first place. What responsibility do you think Democrats have for damaging the faith of the country as well?
Look, I think Democrats have been defending our democracy for the last 5 years. We have put up a valiant fight for the heart and soul of this country. So I really can't lay the blame at the Democratic Party.
You don't take any responsibility.
Well, look, as I acknowledge in my book, there are lots of things I could have done differently or better. But at the end of the day, one of our two great parties has completely abandoned its ideology. It has made itself an anti-truth, anti-democratic cult of the former president. And the responsibility is on that party to once again become a party of ideas. And there are some hopeful signs. And one of the things I want to emphasize in the book, too, is there are also some great profiles and courage that emerge from this period. One of them you're going to have on your show later today, Fiona Hill, but Marie Yovanovitch and Alexander Vindman, people like Dan Coates, Republicans like Dan Coates who did their duty, defended the intelligence community, wouldn't carry out the president's big lies. And we need to be inspired by those examples because we all have a role to play right now in the preservation of this democracy.
Before I let you go, I need to ask you about the January 6th committee. When will you get hold of the documents that the White House has said they're okay with Congress taking, the Trump-era documents?
Well, very soon, I hope. And I applaud
What are you looking for?
I applaud the Biden administration for not asserting executive privilege, not trying to because it's protecting its own prerogative, deprive the American people of the full facts. So hats off to the administration. We should, I think, get those documents soon because the sitting president has the primary say on executive privilege. But we also want to make sure that these witnesses come in and testify. And we are prepared to go forward and urge the Justice Department to criminally prosecute anyone who does not do their lawful duty.
We will watch that carefully.
So, yeah, I thought Adam Schiff spoke a lot of truth there. And I also saw, I was watching the live comments along the way and saw that he was stirring up a bunch of controversy. I thought that Adam Schiff was one of the most unfairly maligned Democrats during the Trump administration. Trump attacked him mercilessly, and so did a lot of other right-wing Republicans. Because he said that there was evidence of collusion, which of course there was, which I've talked about. I don't want to go off into that tangent, but you know that Don Jr. did meet with Russians in Trump Tower and ask for dirt on Hillary. You know that Roger Stone did coordinate with WikiLeaks on the release of the DNC information that was hacked by Russia. And you know that Trump's campaign manager, Paul Manafort, gave internal campaign polling data to a Russian intelligence agent, Konstantin Kilimnik. So anyway, there was definitely evidence of collusion to back up what Adam Schiff was saying. You know, like I saw Santiago Wexler say in the comment section, Schiff is probably the biggest liar in Congress. Well, that actually, there are many, many liars in Congress, so that would be a very hard title to win. But I also think that he's been maligned and did some great work pointing out the corruption and threat of the Trump administration, and he did as well in that last clip. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And I don't know, maybe I should buy his book also. What is it, Midnight in Washington? Read it or put it back up there and maybe talk about it some more. You can let me know what you think about that as well. And they also, bringing it, sort of full circle back to the first clip I showed you, they talked about Chuck Grassley and how he is a symptom of the rot in the Republican Party, how at one point right after January 6th, he sort of stood up, but now he's back to taking Trump's endorsement and buying into the big lie about the election being stolen. But you don't really have to listen to Adam Schiff or any of the other Democrats I'm going to show you on that. The best evidence for the rot in the Republican Party, I think, is this clip from Chris Wallace's interview with Representative Steve Scalise. He is the House Republican whip, so he's high up in the Republican leadership. He has supposedly a lot of he has a moral voice because he was shot at the Republican baseball game and then came back and was really critically injured, but came back and recovered, and now still doesn't support gun control. So Republicans still don't support gun control even after they get shot. That's how much integrity he has. But he doesn't have the integrity to admit that President Joseph R. Biden won the 2020 election fair and square. He keeps talking about this weird constitutional issue about whether states whether the states followed their own election laws in the 2020 election, and I will talk about that more after we watch the clip. And I will also talk about how Chris Wallace, he does a good job of cross-examining him on his one issue, but then he also lets him get away with saying a whole bunch of untrue things, and and along the way, Chris Wallace has to make the right-wing extremists feel comfortable saying, there were a lot of irregularities in the election. Well, that doesn't seem to be a good premise for a question, or whatever. I think I've over-introduced the clip and pre-criticized it enough, but I saw that I got a super chat contribution from Tom Trask along the way. I appreciate the people who support the broadcast that way, or giving me a thumbs up, supportive comments. And anyway, I'll talk about that more near the end. But I want to get to Steve Scalise sort of being cross-examined by Chris Wallace and being unable to admit that Joe Biden won the election over here.
Congressman, I want to talk about one other subject with you. The committee investigating the January 6th insurrection has subpoenaed some documents and also some witnesses, key Trump advisors around that time. Now, President Biden announced this week that he is going to deny former President Trump's claim of executive privilege. He wants to release some of the records. President Trump is likely to take the issue to court. If it comes to a vote in the House for resisting these subpoenas and holding the people who resist the subpoenas in criminal contempt of Congress, how will you vote?
Well, first of all, these are legal issues, and you've got a number of people that have been subpoenaed that are complying. They're trying to comply, but it's a legal process, and they've got attorneys. By the way, the House of Representatives, Speaker Pelosi, spent millions of taxpayer dollars hiring attorneys, too. And there's Justice Department cases moving forward. They've arrested hundreds of people.
No, but sir, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're running out of time. Specifically, the way it would come to the court is they would resist the subpoena, and then the House would vote to hold them in criminal contempt, and then it would go to the court. And my question is, if it comes to a vote on the House floor to hold these people who are ignoring House committee subpoenas to produce documents or testify, how would you vote?
Well, I don't speculate on a bill that's not before me. It's not before me right now. I voted against this commission because it was heavily stacked to be a partisan commission. Look, they don't want to spend any time investigating the origin of COVID. That, by the way, matters to the families of over 600,000 Americans. They don't want to hold an investigation into what happened in Afghanistan, the complete botched withdrawal that led to 13 American soldiers dying. Why don't they focus on getting our economy back on track, get an FDA commissioner to get COVID under control? They want to keep revisiting last year, the year before.
Well, sir, I mean, in fairness, Republicans, when you were in control, wanted to go over Benghazi, and that was a perfectly legitimate thing. 4 Americans died. This was the worst attack in at least a century or more on the U.S. Capitol. Let me ask you one last question in this regard. Clearly, there were irregularities in the last election. There are irregularities in all elections. But I want to ask you a specific question. Do you think the 2020 election was stolen from Donald Trump, and continuing to make that charge, not having states do election reforms, but specifically making this charge that the election was stolen? Do you think that that hurts, undermines American democracy?
Well, Chris, I've been very clear from the beginning. If you look at a number of states, they didn't follow their state-passed laws that govern the election for president. That is what the United States Constitution says. They don't say that the states determine what the rules are. They say the state legislatures determine the rules.
But the states all
in a number of
certified.
states, they didn't follow those state legislative.
The states all
didn't
certified.
follow those legislative rules. Right, but at the end of the day, are we going to follow what the Constitution says or not? I hope we get back to what the Constitution says, but clearly in a number of states, they didn't follow those legislatively set rules.
So you think the election was stolen?
What I said is there are states that didn't follow their legislatively set rules. That's what the United States Constitution says. And I think there are a lot of people that want us to get back to what the Constitution says we should be doing, not just with elections, with a lot of other things too. And then there's some people that want to just ignore what the Constitution says and do their own thing. You know, that's been a debate that's been going on in this country for a long time.
But
why don't we just get back to the Constitution? You wouldn't have that problem.
And there certainly can happen, but there are people out there. There was a rally for President Trump yesterday, and a number of people said, Joe Biden's not my president, Donald Trump is my president. I guess the question is, do you think the election, last time I promised, do you think the election was stolen or not? I understand you think there were irregularities and things that need to be fixed. Do you think the election was stolen?
Yeah. And it's not just irregular. It's states that did not follow the laws set, which the Constitution says they're supposed to follow. When you see states like Georgia cleaning up some of the mess and people calling that Jim Crow law, that's a flat-out lie. I think most people need to stand up against that sort of thing.
All right.
Yeah, but the law says, again, the legislature passed that law. That's what the Constitution of the United States says, and it wasn't followed in a number of states.
Congressman Scalise, thank you. Thanks for your...
So there it was. You saw that the House Republican whip, a high-up member of the Republican leadership in the House of Representatives, unable to say that President Biden won the 2020 election fair and square. He kept talking about how the Constitution says that state legislatures are supposed to make the rules, but sometimes state courts made the rules, which is what he's talking about there. But of course, state courts were trying to interpret the laws made by state legislatures because they had to make sure that people had the right to vote, even in the strange conditions of COVID, where people couldn't necessarily vote in person as well as they might have when there wasn't a worldwide pandemic going on that has so far killed over 700,000 Americans and was already a huge threat to everyone's health back in November 2020. That's what Steve Scalise is complaining about there. And the idea that the Constitution says that state legislatures make the decision, that's true. Actually, the Constitution even says that state legislatures get to choose who senators are. At least that's the way it was at the beginning. But there are also ways to challenge what happens in the states. And Chris Wallace did point out that all of the states certified the electors, but you can also challenge it in state court and federal court, and there were a lot of those challenges made, and they went nowhere. That's the way our system works. There's the Constitution, there's the legislatures that pass the laws, and there are the state courts that interpret those laws, and if you think it violates the federal Constitution, then you can take it to federal court, all the way up to the Supreme Court. And there were so many cases, so many court cases, and so little evidence supporting the Trump position, the Republican position, and it's just ridiculous that Steve Scalise is not willing to give up the big lie, but it shows what I've been talking about, the rot in the Republican Party, the threat to U.S. democracy, especially given that the way elections historically work, the power out of the party out of power gains in the off-year elections, and the Democrats only have like a 6-seat margin in the House of Representatives right now, so it's likely that Republicans will retake at least the House in November 2022, and all I can hope is that the threat, that all these stories and all this information showing the threat of Trump to U.S. democracy, the rot in the Republican Party, that all of those stories, if you excuse the expression, will trump what you saw in the Fox News Sunday news summary about how bad news for Biden and everybody hates him now. I don't think that's going to be the main story going into November 2022, but it's definitely a competing narrative that we'll see how it plays out. As you know, the pundits always say, only time will tell. But I showed you that one Republican as the best evidence for the rot in the Republican Party, but it still can be described really well by Democrats. I showed you Adam Schiff before, Steve Scalise, and now I'm going to show you Sheldon Whitehouse, a senator, well, two senators who are on that Senate Judiciary Committee that just put out this report about what happened around January 6th. But as Sheldon Whitehouse points out in this next clip, and you didn't really see mentioned in any of the news reports, the Senate Judiciary Committee report is just an interim report. They're still investigating. And he also kind of slips up, or I don't know if he slips up or slips up in making a misstatement or says too much. At one point when he talks about the investigation into election interference in Georgia, remember when like Trump called and said, can you just find me 11,300 whatever votes? That's all I need, just find me the votes or whatever. That whole scandal. Well, apparently we all know there's an investigation going on right now, and Sheldon Whitehouse, he says there's a criminal, I think, well, we'll watch it together, but I'm pretty sure he says criminal prosecution, and it says, oh, I'm sorry, I mean criminal investigation. But I think those are the phrases he uses, but I guess we'll find out for sure when we watch that clip together. This is Chuck Todd interviewing Senator Sheldon Whitehouse about the Senate Judiciary Committee's investigation into the shenanigans around January 6th and the insurrection over here.
Good to be on with you. I want to start with, I know that you were limited in your investigation because you're the Judiciary Committee, and this was about the actions of the Department of Justice. So how complete of a picture do you think you have of what President Trump did, and what more would you like to know?
Well, we have a very complete picture of the extent to which Trump was personally involved in this. This is a question in which you can actually connect the President of the United States to the scheme. The second thing that we know is that it focused very heavily on Georgia. So that relates and feathers into the Georgia prosecution that's underway, I should say the investigation that's underway down in Fulton County. Those two things link up. What we don't know is who was really behind this. The text of the transcript and the body English of the witnesses suggests that they had very little regard for this character, Jeffrey Clark, who was nominally going to be the new Attorney General. They doubted his qualifications to even have that role. So it's a possibility, I suppose, that he saw this moment and grabbed it, but it's an equally real possibility that he was a cog in a larger machine, and we've got a lot of work to do to figure out how that machine ran through this period, who was behind it, where the money came from, and what's been going on.
You think it's somebody other than Donald Trump? I mean, when I hear that, you're essentially saying you believe there's somebody else involved, somebody else was pulling the strings. Who could that be besides Donald Trump?
We don't know yet, but this guy jumped to a dark money enterprise, so he's been taken care of, Jeffrey Clark. There was a lot of activity around this with members of Congress. There's just a lot left to be learned, and particularly, as the old saw goes, follow the money. Who was paying for this stuff, and how did it all work?
The fact that that these are former Trump appointees that have divulged what clearly, at least Mr. Rosen and some others, clearly are divulging this because they were alarmed at the pressure campaign they were under. You have seen these folks behind closed doors. Shouldn't the public see this? I mean, we have a credibility problem thanks to the former president. Shouldn't the public see these folks under oath telling this story to the American public?
Yes, absolutely. It's really telling stuff. And when you consider that these were Trump appointees, people who are willing to go right to the chalk line, and in my view, even over it, when those folks saw this as outlandish and illegal and something that they'd all quit before they'd participate in, that shows how berserk this had gotten. And with that question, we then go on to the further question of, okay, how was this organized? Was this really just one little guy in the Department of Justice with a wild idea? I doubt it.
How about Bill Barr? He resigned, and that resignation to me looks more and more compelling all the time, meaning, what did he know? Why did he resign when he did? Are you going to get him under oath to tell his story?
Well, I'm not going to try to predict what the investigation is going to continue to do, but this was an interim report, so we will continue looking at these questions.
So there you go, the Senator Sheldon Whitehouse clip that I promised, and I especially like the whole cog in the larger machine question and who was really behind all this and followed the money, and that's actually only part of the interview. You can see the rest of it following the link under sources in the video description to the NBC News Meet the Press website. But I also was watching along the way. I got another Super Chat contribution from Lulu Girl. Thank you for that. Here are the Super Chat contributors. So thanks for that. And I do have one more Newsmaker clip I want to show you before the bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the fans of my dog Sandy and cat Dash out there. This is Senator Amy Klobuchar, also on the Senate Judiciary Committee, talking about the same topic you saw Sheldon Whitehouse talk about in the last clip, over with Dana Bash. And in this clip, she talks about how close the United States already has come to this constitutional crisis, and also about this issue of whether the January 6th Commission will be able to enforce its subpoenas in the final Newsmaker clip that I will watch with you today over here.
For competition. I know there are a lot of other issues to talk about, which I want to get to. The new report from the Judiciary Committee, you were a member of that committee. It details former President Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. How close did the U.S. come to a real constitutional crisis?
Well, as we know now, we know he brought the lawsuits that the courts rejected all over this country. We know he tried to convince local election officials to steal votes, which they refused. We now know that at least 9 times he pressured the Justice Department of the United States. Officials had taken oath, not to Donald Trump, but to the Constitution. He pressured them to do the same. And in his own words, according to notes from the meeting, he basically said that, say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me. Those were his words. For the most part, they resisted, and that's what we found out from the report. And the report is important because it creates some new information that we didn't have before from people like Acting Attorney General Rosen. That information will be very helpful to the January 6th committee that's going on over in the House. It's going to look at all of this.
So let me ask you about that January 6th committee. The former president directed some of his former aides not to cooperate with that committee. At least one, Steve Bannon, says he's going to defy the committee's subpoenas. You are a leading Democrat, as I mentioned, on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Do you think Merrick Garland's Justice Department should get involved quickly and enforce those subpoenas aggressively?
That's going to be Merrick Garland's decision.
What do you think?
I think ultimately the courts will decide. Yes, I think subpoenas have to be enforced. And for Steve Bannon to claim he has executive privilege when he wasn't even in the executive office during January 6th, that is absolutely absurd. And most legal analysts would agree with me on that.
Real quick, I want to ask about the 3.5.
And there, if you've watched the rest of the interview, Dana Bash asks Amy Klobuchar about the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill and what's going on with that and how it's linked to the bipartisan infrastructure deal, topics that I've discussed over several episodes going over the last few months as that's been negotiated. And apparently the latest deadline is the end of October. We'll see if it gets kicked off farther away, or if they actually come to some deal, and that if they do eventually come to some deal that will kick up President Biden's approval rating, which probably isn't down at 38%, despite what Fox News wants at this point, or what Fox News has been showing the viewers all week from that one Quinnipiac poll I was talking about. But I showed you, I think, 3 Democrats there, Representative Adam Schiff, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and Senator Amy Klobuchar, all arguing pretty persuasively that Trump is a continuing threat to the U.S., to our U.S. democracy. And probably most persuasive at all was the rot in the Republican Party demonstrated by the Representative Steve Scalise clip I showed you, along with all the news summaries. So I hope you appreciate all those clips I picked out, and the commentary and media criticism, political commentary, media criticism I added along the way. I appreciate all of you who showed up and gave me your live comments, my recorded show viewers. There are links down in the video description if you want to support my videos financially through PayPal or by becoming a monthly patron on Patreon. There's also a join button down there to become a YouTube member. And I won't go into all that and the exclusive benefits from all those choices you might make. But I do want to finish up the show with the bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip I mentioned. I'm not sure how often I have shown Dash the cat's ability to jump, but that is something I am showing in the Dash and Sandy clip I took earlier this morning while I was working on the show over here. There you go. I guess I actually made the cat noise you heard in that video just to get Dash's attention, and then he jumped up on the bed where I was working on my laptop getting the show ready. So anyway, there you are, your bonus Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip. Thanks for joining me. I'll be back next Monday at 3 p.m. I think Pacific time. I think this time might actually be better for people who requested it. It gave me extra time. I'm probably going to need extra time next week too. So, and if it makes it easier for people to show up and easier for me to do the show, I guess an extra few hours doesn't make the news programs any more stale from Sunday. Well, I guess we'll see how it goes. But anyway, I'll be back next Monday. Probably won't have time to upload anything else, but maybe, you never know. Keep looking, keep checking. keep checking my channel every day just to be sure. But until next Monday, I guess I'll be seeing all of you. Oh, thank you, Von Rick. Jumping Cats, love your work. Thank you for the super chat at the end there. And until next Monday, or until I have some other reason to upload a video, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.